is a different kind of ought. It's not a moral ought. It's not that you morally ought to hold this subjectivist. It's a rational ought. It doesn't have to do with moral values, it has to do with rational values. And another thing is that if they could also just say, well, you don't have to if you don't want to. You can accept whatever you want. The subjectivism is true. So there's a very big difference between when subjectivism is true, what I ought to do from my perspective, and whether or not subjectivism is true. So there's that. It was a technical thing that's hung up. Okay, I have always, we can take that later. Okay, thanks. So there's another one.
So now the time pressure is on. What's the biggest problem for the theistic position? I think I agree with Einar here that it's versions of the problem of evil, which I did respond to in my previous speech. I think that is the biggest obstacle to belief, certainly in a Christian type of God, because as I know, it's not an argument against belief in a deity per se, but against a specific concept of deity, and I gave some responses to that in my previous speech. What sort of God comes out of the arguments that I'm giving? And that's one way of defining what you're meaning by God, to point to, well, here is a bunch of arguments, and Occam's razor would favour putting together the conclusions of all of those arguments into one being, rather than distributing them amongst a whole range of different beings. So there's one being who's the cause of the universe, and one being who fine-tuned it, and another being who's the ground of moral value, and so on. So you're sort of building up, like the police building up an identikit picture of the suspect in a crime from different witnesses. On desire, Einar says, well, perhaps these existential and existential desires in us used to correspond to reality, but no longer do. So they don't prove that there is a transcendent ground of hope now. But maybe you might be tempted to think that if God, if a transcendent ground of reality that foundational to hope that in the past was a hope that did correspond to that ground, it did exist, that the most plausible position is to think that that ground continues to exist now, rather than something somehow made it go out of existence. So maybe that debate will hinge on what you think, what your intuitions are on that issue of whether you say, if God did exist, maybe the most plausible thing to think is that he still does. Also, the argument I gave from with the fact that we should assume that innate desires correspond to reality until shown otherwise, in a sense is specifically designed to counter the objection that maybe we can point to some innate desires that fail to correspond to reality. It's not enough just to say, well, here's an innate desire that I think does fail to correspond to reality. The question will be, well, does this innate desire that I'm using in this argument to point to God as the ground of hope and worth and morality or whatever that we hope for, does that desire fail to correspond to reality? And we should assume that it does correspond to reality until we're given a specific reason not to think so. The psychology of assuming intentionality behind things in the world, this is, I would have thought, an argument that would tend to be put more within the realm of design arguments, and to say, it just seems to you like the world is designed, this is an overactive sort of evolutionary mechanism that had its use in the past and has come up with these false ideas of design behind the world. So I thought it was interesting that Einar didn't put that as a counter to, say, the fine-tuning argument, but tried to use it here. I don't quite see the relevance there. The desires, the innate existential desires I'm talking about, that they are things that we experience from the inside as outwardly directed, as teleological, as having reference, as wanting there to be a satisfaction that corresponds to them. Nothing was said about the argument from causality or the arguments from Jesus in that last speech, so perhaps we'll pick them up later. As for the issues of duty, if I've got time, is to go to the argument from duty. Of course, there are lots of different moral theories about picking out what the right thing to do is, what we should pursue, and so on. But the question on any of those theories, I think, will be, if that is a theory that says, yes, there are moral duties that hold independently of what you or I or we decide or think or agree, there are discoverable, objective moral duties, how does that particular moral theory account for the existence of such a thing? Does it do a better job than the argument that says, well, there is someone to whom we are rightly obligated. There is someone who prescribes those prescriptions that we meet in moral experience. So on hedonism, suppose hedonism is true, and you think that you have an objective moral duty to pursue pleasure and to avoid pain. But what accounts for the objective prescriptive and obligatory nature of the need to pursue pleasure and avoid pain? So you haven't really got away from the core of this argument from duty by doing that, I think. Also, on terms of rational ought, I think that the rational ought doesn't give you a moral ought. It gives you a pragmatic ought. It says, this does follow, this conclusion does follow from these premises. If you're interested in being rational, that's what you should believe in that rational ought sense, a pragmatic sense of, if this is what you want, being rational, then this is what you have to do to achieve that end. But logic itself can't tell you that it's wrong to be cavalier about considering arguments, and you ought to consider arguments fairly, that you ought to, oh come on, be reasonable. You can't get those moral oughts out of logical descriptions of what premises follow from others, any more than you can get the moral ought out of any kind of is description of the way the world is, as David Hume argued back in the Enlightenment. Thanks very much.
So, I need that. You stole the microphone.
It's my dastardly plan.
Silence me. Okay, so thanks again, and now it's starting to get interesting. I don't know, a lot of the things you said I didn't actually say. So that's, but let me mention a couple things. So with respect to psychological evidence I alluded to, I did say that that could also explain why we have these intentions, why we put intentions behind this argument. So that would be the defeasible reason that I wouldn't be totally convinced by this, because the psych evidence might be indicating that I'm just using an old desire for a new purpose. With that said, this is often called a debunking argument. With that said, I'm not in general convinced by these kinds of arguments that says, well, the cause of your this and this is something, therefore you make it illegitimate to that. I mean, the cause might be arbitrary, but you might still be right. So I'm not in general convinced by this. So a priest might tell me that God exists, and then it turns out that the priest was an idiot, but then it turns out that God exists anyways. And I shouldn't believe him, in one sense, but not for the reason that he told me. So I mean, I'm not in general convinced that just because there's some old reason for me putting intention behind this, I should now believe that there's an intention behind it. There might actually be, even though that reason was bad. Or God might have put that reason in there to begin with, right? So there are many reasons back and forth to think that the psych evidence doesn't debunk this, but it might. So I just think we should go 10 more rounds on this. The other, I also didn't say that the existential desire that we have for meaning. I'm actually writing a book on the meaning of life right now. I have an existential desire for meaning. I'm desperately searching meaning. That's like the main purpose of my life, to find meaning. But I didn't say that desire used to correspond to anything that no longer does. I said we have a bunch of desires that used to correspond to no longer does. And that gives us evidence. We shouldn't assume, without further ado, that our desires therefore correspond to something. Not even when we don't have other explanations of them. I'm just not convinced by that. And I also think that there are tons of other explanations for our desires that we need to consider that might outweigh that assumption that we should just believe our innate desires to correspond to something real. Because there are so many other explanations. Like psychology, all these explanations for our desires. And we are terrible at introspection, for example. There's tons of psych evidence that we are terrible at introspection. Like what we don't know what's in our own mind. Like our parents know us better than we do. In fact, Facebook, when they do a search on 30 of your likes, they know more than you about you. Exactly. It's pretty interesting. So, I didn't say that. With respect to the moral values without God, an interesting fact is that Peter is now saying, look, if you take hedonist or the preference view, what explains that obligation connecting to avoiding pain and gaining pleasure? He wants a further explanation. But the whole point is that that's where explanation stops. Pleasure is good. I understand that. Pleasure is good. That's why I want pleasure. There's nothing more to say. Pain is bad. That's why we should avoid pain. That's where it stops. And he wants to know, but why does that give you an obligation? Because of the pain. Because of the pleasure. It's like the classical argument against theists. When they say, oh, God is the ground of everything. And I say, what grounds God? And the theists are like, oh, that's such a boring objection. Everyone's giving that. Now he's sort of giving it to me. So it's an interesting fact. I mean, the hedonists would just say it stops with pain and pleasure. The theists would just say it stops with God. And the preference theorists would just say it stops with preferences. And where should you stop? That's the question. And I don't think you should ask the one for more explanation and then not demand it of yourself. That's like a bad dialectical move. So I think that's where it stops. And note, finally, that I think I have a better handle on pain being bad and pleasure being good, even though I'm not a hedonist. I have a better handle on that fact than I have on anything coming to this question. That's why I started out problematizing resistance in God. I don't really know what it means when it comes to really digging into the concepts. When you dig into the concept of pain, I'll show you some pain, and we'll quickly agree that we should avoid this. Right? So I think it's probably a more reasonable place to stop in pain and pleasure preferences than in some further explanation that's supposed to ground the goodness of that again. Because then the question is, what grounds that goodness? So there's a lot of other things I could say. One sentence, can I say one more? So I didn't mention the causal argument that you get. It's a version of the Kalam cosmological argument, if you know this. It's saying something like, every event has a cause, every physical event has a physical cause, the universe is a physical event, so it has a physical cause. We can't be the first physical cause because that would have a physical cause, so that would have to be God. That's the argument. Now, my objection to that argument, I'm actually not convinced by that at all. My objection to that argument is just that there doesn't have to be first physical cause. There could be a physical cause backwards. And if you appeal to the Big Bang and you say, but the Big Bang is supposed to be the first physical cause, I would just say that's not really at all what's coming out of physical theories. What's coming out of physical theories is that the Big Bang is a singularity. It's a point, a destination where nothing goes beyond. But there's no first event after the Big Bang. It's like the numbers. You can go closer and closer to infinity, right? Or backwards. You can go from 0 to negative numbers. You can go down to negative infinity. But there's no number right before negative infinity. It's a limit. It's not like a jump from there to there. So there's a big jump from there to the next one, because there's no next one. This is provable in mathematics. So there doesn't have to be a first physical cause, just like there doesn't have to be a biggest negative number. It's a limit point that doesn't really exist, the Big Bang. So that's plausible interpretation of the model. So I mean, I'm not convinced by the first cause at all. So that's why I didn't mention it. Okay, I probably talked. It was very interesting though. I think we got to some juice here. Does he have another one or just
no? Questions to each other.
Oh, questions to each other. So,
let's come here and pass this back and forth. Do you want to go first?
I can go first.
Yeah.
So, I'll just put this back on. We've got the new remarkable, and I have no idea how it works. So my questions to I guess I have two questions. Are we supposed to have two questions? Okay, so I have two questions. One is I have a problem here, as I have in general. So I've done a lot of these debates with theists. And I'm not, I always get called as the atheist in the debate, but I'm not really the atheist. But my main problem is always sort of the same very often. So I wonder what your thoughts are on this. Theists, so when people argue for theism, they sort of have, here's my problem, they have an agenda, they have a conclusion, and then they desperately go to find the reason for that conclusion. And for me, as a philosopher who have no agenda, I find it sort of worrisome that you're desperately searching for a conclusion that you're already on board with, rather than trying to figure out the real reasons whether you should be on board with. So it's sort of like desperately looking for the reasons for what you already believe. That's sort of my main worry with the general, a lot of theism debates. So they sort of, they're presupposing what they're trying to prove. And a lot of the times, it doesn't have to be circular argumentation, but a lot of times like it's not, I feel it's somewhat dishonest to not really consider every pro and con. So I can mention a lot of books to do this, but in general. So that, I wonder what your thoughts are on that. Like how much you already have your conclusion and just looking for reasons for it. Is that why, for example, you didn't have any arguments against God's reason? Or was it just because you were supposed to be the theist, you just gave all the reasons for it? Maybe that's a better explanation, but that's my general problem with theism. They have this agenda that they go for. Another question, my question is, what do you think of that? The other question is, what do you think of epistemic humbleness? Like, I mean, how much do you think you know and how much do you think you don't know? How strong are your beliefs? How weak are your beliefs? So I am pretty much a skeptic, so I teach epistemology, which is the theory of knowledge, and I every time I teach this, I'm like, I don't know anything. I have no clue, I have no reason to believe anything. I might be in the matrix, I don't even know if I have hands sometimes. I put myself in a skeptical context. And then I can forget them and go out and play backgammon, as Hugh said, or I can drive my motorcycle and think, oh, life's great, I know that I should turn out, otherwise I will die. So I know stuff. But when I start questioning it, I no longer know anything. So it's sort of like contextual to me when I say I know stuff and when I say I don't know stuff. And I wonder why theists never have this like skeptical attitude to, and they say they doubt stuff, but in the academic literature and in the books on this and in the debates, it doesn't really come off as they have much doubt. So I wonder what your thoughts are on epistemic humbleness in general. And it's related to the first one, but the first one is more like dialectic, the other one is more like knowledge.
Yeah, I think I'll probably take them in reverse order if I may. I think with knowledge, I think I'm convinced the sort of common sense tradition that says we start with our basic intuitions, the way the world seems to us, and then we hold that to the account of rational critical inquiry. But ultimately, any argument for anything is going to ultimately track down to some sort of presuppositions where you say, well, that just seems reasonable to me. I would find it hard to give an argument for this on the basis of anything that seems more basic or more plausible as a starting place for arguing than we've already arrived to. And certainly in some areas, like with belief in the rationality of following the basic rules of logical deduction and inference and so on, you can't argue for the rationality of those things without assuming them already. But I don't think that shows that it's irrational to assume them. Assuming those starting points is the only way to be rational and critical of anything else. And I hold the same kind of view. As I say, I started out talking with Cicero sort of basic perceptual intuition or religious experience of there being a God. Certainly that's kind of crossing over slightly into the first question here. My background of being raised within a Christian context, for me it was the sense of then coming to the stage of you become an adult and you start thinking, yeah, what do I really think? Do I really think this, believe this just because of my upbringing, my family background, peer pressure or whatever? Going to university and studying philosophy and saying, okay, let's take these arguments seriously. You've got to follow the logic where it leads. You've got to follow the evidence where it leads. You can't profess faith in a God of truth and not care about truth. Those two yes, you start with the assumption that they're not going to come apart, but if they come apart, it is no good saying, well, I want to hold on to God and ditch truth. Thank you very much. That makes no sense. Don't do that, folks. Follow truth. So certainly I've gone through and written about in my professional work. In the start of my book, Faithful Guide to Philosophy, that Leaf was kind enough to mention, I start out saying that Christians have to take doubt seriously. Doubt is the only way to work through what you believe, why you believe it, whether you're going to continue to believe it, whether it can stand up to investigation and objections, and so on. And that I myself, yes, I've had times of doubt, I've seriously questioned things, I've grappled with the literature on the problem of evil and the hiddenness of God and the alternative explanations for fine-tuning and all of this. It's just that, yeah, I have myself happened to come out on the conclusion that I think it's at least more likely than not that there is a God. I'm not 100% certain about that. There are things that I am more certain of than I am that God exists. I will give the take. I am more certain that I exist, than that God exists. I could imagine doubting and seriously thinking, okay, that there isn't a God. I really can't even imagine doubting, okay, I'm not really thinking this. So, but there are things that I think are more certain than my belief in God, but I think that the belief in God, that God exists, is sufficiently rational for that to be where I'm staking my claim at the moment, but I want to be open to continuing that investigation and continuing to look at the arguments against and so on that people come up with.
Can I modify my other question, since it was
Yeah,
too
sure.
close to the one you already answered? The modification of it is more like, so this is, I wonder, how sure are you of the specific notion of God, rather than some really vague general idea of God? So like, there's this problem, if you grew up in a Muslim society, do you think you would still be a Christian? Probably not. You grew up in a Christian society, you became a Christian. What a coincidence. I mean, so there's all these different kinds of religions you can grow up with. And that worries me a lot. That's why I wouldn't join any society at all, because it would be seeming so arbitrary. It's like, why do I cheer for Man U rather than Liverpool? I have no idea. It's just like the color of the suits they're wearing. I mean, it's irrational. So, how certain are you of this particular notion? You kept talking about the Christian God. I just kept talking about some fundamental being.
Yeah.
We don't know what it is.
Although I did want to make space in what I was saying for agreeing with you about the rationality of starting with a very minimal notion of God, but being open to getting a more specific notion. And of course, particularly with the arguments that I raised about the question of who Jesus is and what the historical evidence of the Christian revelation claim is, if you think that evidence is good evidence, and of course, if you already come at that evidence with belief in the existence of some kind of a God with intentionality and power and so on, then it will take less specific evidence to convince you of the revelation claim than if you came at it as a hard atheistic sort of Richard Dawkins position or whatever. But if you think that's enough to convince you that Christ is who the central tradition of Christian orthodoxy as thought it was, then that does give you sort of leads on pretty immediately to a much more specified concept of, okay, God is now the God of Abraham, the God of Jesus, and anything that reasonably follows from that. But I think I really agree with you. I'm more convinced of theism in general than I am of Christian theism. Again, if someone were to show me really convincing evidence that Jesus didn't rise from the grave and the disciples all made up the Gospels and it was carnal, whatever, I can imagine such evidence being brought forward that might be convincing, and then what I would do was I would say, oh, okay, I was fooled about that, but that doesn't mean I have to give up on belief in God. I would retreat to a sort of general philosophical theism of the kind that I think you can get out at the end of these arguments that I still think are good ones until such time as someone shows me that they're not, in which case I'll change my mind again. And indeed on certain issues of, say, philosophical theology, I have changed my mind over the years. So When I started at university as an undergrad, I took the view that God was atemporal. I've been since convinced by, and particularly reading the writings of William Lane Craig on this issue, that God is temporal and not atemporal. So I've shifted my understanding of who and what God is on the basis of engagement with philosophical arguments, but I haven't yet been convinced that there is no God.
So your questions.
Right, yes, okay, thank you. I think two. One would be, I think it would be good to give you an opportunity to comment on that sort of specifying Christian revelation claims of evidence and what you make of Jesus. And also to give you an opportunity to say something a little bit more about what you mean by living a religious life, although you don't believe that there is a God, although you have hope, trust or faith, however you want to put it, in God in the absence of that belief. What does that look like in practice?
Yeah, okay, so I'll copy you and do the last first. So how do you live a religious life on hope rather than belief? So the case I imagine the stuff I've written on this is that there's a requirement behind it. It's something like this. It's not irrational to act on your hope if it leads to better things. Right? So if it leads to improvement or something, it leads to you having a better life, and it doesn't hurt any others. And overall, when you weigh things up, it's better off acting on your hope than not acting on your hope. Then I claim it's not irrational to act on it. I could have said it's rational to act on it, but I wouldn't go that far. There are nuances here between not being irrational and actually being rational. But I say it's not irrational. So, the case I imagine is someone like someone who doesn't really believe that there's a God, can't see the evidence favoring him overall, but it really helps him in the social setting and the life he lives, the community he lives, to go to church with the others and take his family to church and have this community that he hangs out with, social relations. He just gets a better life in general. And he really hopes there's a God. So he goes to church every Sunday in the hope that there's a God, but he just doesn't believe. And overall, this is not hurting anyone, this is not making things worse. Then doesn't seem irrational to me for this person to do that. So he can live according to even a very specific notion of God, like a Christian God. If he lives well on that, according to that notion, and he does what the Christian ethics tell him to do and so on, that could be a good life for this person. And I wouldn't say it's irrational for him to do it, as long as he doesn't contradict like other things that would be better for him, or he doesn't make things worse off for others, or he doesn't contradict science, doesn't start saying stupid things about science or anything like that. He just acts on the hope that there's some explanation behind all this other stuff going on. And that seems not irrational to me. So that kind of attitude, and that seems to be possibly a good life, and that seems to be something that might even be better than to actually believe that there's a God who has these strong opinions about what women should wear, and that gay people shouldn't have sex, and all the specifics that just are so obviously parochial. They're just so obviously like anthropomorphizing this God. They're just so ridiculous, like human things to do. So it seems like not having that specific notion. So that's the kind of picture I was imagining. What's the other question?
How do we make of what you do make of Jesus and the
Jesus. Oh, Jesus. I don't really make much of Jesus. I don't know. To me, the reason I didn't comment on your part of Jesus, or anything, I would just leave it to the historian and archaeologist and so on to figure out whether this figure Jesus really existed. And the more evidence they gather of this real figure existing, the more I would believe that he existed. But then the next step would be, is this real figure here, flesh and blood, something divine? And in that case, I have just no reason to think he would be divine. The reason would be, coming from texts that was written a long time ago, and I wouldn't trust those texts being like, having read a lot of texts from a long time ago, I wouldn't trust those texts being really truth apt in that sense. People believed a lot of weird things back in the days, and today. So I guess my answer is just I trust the historians when it comes to the Jesus flesh and blood version of it, and I don't trust the text very much when it comes to the Divine Bible. To me, the Bible is a really great book. It's like one of the best novels ever written, but it's not something I don't have any reason to take that more seriously than other books of the same style, the same category. So that's my problem with it. I wouldn't treat it as special. Like I treat the Quran and other books in the same way. It's nothing special. There are some good stuff in there, some bad stuff in there, some funny stuff in there, some outrageous stuff in there, and it's fun. It's fun to read, but it's a book. And I have a very critical perspective of all books, I guess. So I don't make much of it. So I think that's my answer.
Thank you very much.
5 minutes closing each.
Oh, yeah, 5 minutes closing
Is
as
there
well.
an order that we're hearing for that? Me? Sorry, fine for me.
Or are you good with the rest of the one?
I don't know.
Keep going. Okay. Now we've got separate mics. This is much more.
Should have done that earlier.
Should have done that earlier. Let's see. So in my opening speech, I observed that most people find God's existence to be intuitively plausible. Before sketching a number of arguments for God's existence, Einar explained that as someone who doesn't believe either that God exists or that God doesn't exist, he judges the arguments for and against theism to result basically in a sort of stalemate. On the anti-theism side of the balance, it seems to me that Einar raised very few issues, none of which is actually an argument against theism as he himself defined it at the beginning of the debate. Einar's statement that the more we put into our meaning of God, the less likely God is to exist. One caveat there, I think, should be that this assumes that God can't have a metaphysically necessary existence. I mean, God exists necessarily puts more meaning into God than God exists. But if the former is true, then God's existence has a probability of 1. If God is the ground of all things, the causal ground behind the rest of reality apart from God himself, then God's existence can't depend upon a sort of lucky throw of the contingent causal dice. The evidential argument from evil has quite rightly featured heavily, and it's a substantial topic. While much more could and should be said about it, I hope we have seen that, first of all, this isn't an argument for atheism, and that whatever weight one does think that the evidential form of the argument has, the logical form having long been abandoned by the majority of philosophers, whatever weight one thinks the evidential form of the argument has must, and I agrees on this, be weighed against whatever positive evidence you think there is for theism. Talking of which, let's go back to the cumulative argument that I opened with. On desire, Einar says, no, it's not just that there were these instincts that used to correspond to reality but that now fail to, and that undermines the argument, but rather the fact that we're inferring from that data set of innate desires that fail to correspond to reality to reach the conclusion that we shouldn't trust such innate desires. But we automatically, and I think rationally, do that all the time until such time as we get evidence that we're wrong. And indeed, now you'd have to focus on the question of, okay, well, how many of our innate desires do fail to correspond to satisfactions? One might argue that at least the majority of innate human desires are not made in vain in that way, but we do have these innate desires that would be in vain if God didn't exist, and that therefore God does probably exist. It would still follow. The argument from rationality that I brought up hasn't really been discussed between us. Design, I must have misheard what Einar said, because he says this does perhaps apply to the fine-tuning, but then he himself, I thought, gave quite a good reason for being cautious about making that application. And indeed, I wasn't just pointing to the fine-tuning and saying, hey, doesn't that look like it's designed? I gave some criteria of specified complexity, criteria that in our experience, in other instances, is a reliable criteria, indication of design, and saying that we should think the fine-tuning is designed because it fits that criteria. So we were being more careful there than simply pointing to our intuitions. On causation, could in the past, Big Bang is an infinite limit that you can infinitely approach. I thought that was quite an interesting point, actually. But I think you still have to say on the Big Bang cosmology that there was a first physical state. And similarly, as with events, one might argue that physical states, physical things, are contingent things that need causes, and that since there is no prior physical state to the first physical state prior to the Big Bang, unless you're going to abandon the idea that causality is there, then you're going to have to say that there was some sort of non-physical cause, and ultimately some sort of cause that does not itself require a cause. In terms of duty, again, this move from something being good, say, because it's pleasurable, but does that really ground, does that automatically buy you the concept of it being morally right, morally obligated, or wrong, morally obligated not to do? Is saying this is pleasurable is the same as saying this is good? Does that get you the concept of a categorical moral prescription or duty more plausibly than saying that that obligation or prescription comes from someone who prescribes and obligates you? I don't think so. And last but not least, Jesus, a little interaction there in the Q&A time, and I would simply say that I appealed to, particularly when you're talking about the data that I appealed to in the resurrection argument, I'm appealing to evidence that's accepted by historians, and I'm not just meaning Christian historians, I mean the historical guild, and the controversial question is how you explain the historically recognised facts of his crucifixion, burial, empty tomb, and apparent perceived resurrection experiences of his disciples and so on. The question is, what does a better job of explaining that data than the Christian hypothesis? So I hope this debate will encourage you to continue critically examining not only the reasons for and against believing in God's existence, but your reasons for believing or not believing in God. And there, Einar and I can agree. So thank you.
Let me just mention two things in the closing. One is, when it comes to, you mentioned now that the existence of God, is it existence necessarily, or just contingently? Contingently meaning it exists, but it could have failed to exist. And necessarily meaning it could not have failed to exist. It must have existed, no matter what. And there are the great theories of necessity that I like. They're actually not demanding more of the world to be true than contingent truth. So the great necessary truths, like mathematics, the 2 + 2 is 4, for example, is a necessary truth. And the reason it's necessary is that it's requiring nothing of the world. It's true regardless of how the world turned out. That's why it's necessary. While the contingent truths are true because of the way the world is. But they could have been different had the world been different. But mathematics, for example, could have been different, no matter how the world turned out. So it's something that's true regardless. And I think the interesting part of the debate over God's existence is whether a God exists that has to exist necessarily. I don't think it's very interesting to debate whether God exists contingently as a boring thesis, because it's sort of like not something we could even come to a priori by arguing if it's contingently, because if the world had been different, it means he could not have existed. We need to figure out what the world is like first. So the interesting concept of God that we can reasonably argue about is the one that exists necessarily, regardless of how the world is. So I'm interested in the notion of God as sort of the fundamental ground of things that exists necessarily. It has to be there in order for there to be anything at all. So I think necessary existence is super interesting. The other comment that I'll just leave with is I just wish, and just end with encouragement, since he did. He encouraged you to think harder about this, critically. And I encourage you to think about these matters, but also to actually try to figure out whether what you really want to believe. If you really want to believe that there's a God, that's fine. Just be honest. Say you really want to believe that there's a God. And that's pretty much, I kind of want to. That's why I say I hope that there's a God. I just can't find reasons yet. Maybe I will find them at some point. But I wish the debate could be less split between the two sides, like black or white debates. I wish there could be more nuances. I wish there could be like a debate where it's like, I really don't know, but I think these reasons favor it, these are against, and here's why, and let's debate them until we die. I just wish there could be more gray areas. I want 50 shades of gray in these debates, not just black and white. So that's my encouragement, because I really don't know. I've thought about this a lot. I'm like I've written on this, and this is my promotion professor is actually in philosophy of religion. So I do work on this all the time. I just can't figure out why people so strongly believe this thing. That's my problem. so I encourage people to think through, especially the concept, whether you're actually really hoping it's true, and therefore looking for reasons, or whether you actually, what are the reasons you're actually having? I'm not accusing Peter of not being honest here. I'm just saying, this is where I think we will make some progress if we have this up on the table. More in these debates than we usually do. But I really appreciate it. Thanks to Peter and Leif and everyone else who's organized this. Are they supposed to ask questions?
But there will be an opening for questions, at least for 10 minutes more.
Leif, we have the term for another hour. So we can take all the questions we want.
We can take all the questions we want.
Okay, I have to actually get a taxi to the airport within half an hour.
Yeah.
Half an hour. So, but I'm here for half an hour. 20 minutes questions, and if you really have to pee, feel free to go to the bathroom. But 20 minutes for questions. Any questions?
I have a question about the Almighty God or God, because when people say I know it's not in all many different religions, they don't define God is have to be Almighty. But some religions they do define God as Almighty. But Almighty is a state, so you can do everything. But you don't have to do it. But you are principle. You are able to do everything. But unlike human, we are Almighty. We are not able to do everything. But you can, if you are able, you can choose to do it or not. But you are not able to do everything. So this is a state we can be in. We are always stuck in this state, whether you like it or not. But God seems like that he or she are not able to be in this state that we are always stuck in. So if he are not able to be in this state, is he still or she still Almighty? In quantum mechanics, I'm a physics student and I study quantum mechanics. In quantum mechanics, you can be in two states, which is completely contradict each other. But for every time you observe the state, if the state is observable, it will only show one. It will always show. You can have many different states, certain position, but you can always one state shows up when you observe. So if somehow like the quantum mechanics is related to this problem, and somehow that you can argue that he is Almighty, but you can never observe that you can always be true, this is this. But whenever you observe it, they only pick one. But when they pick one, that is contrary to some religions, the statement that he is Almighty. Because in this case, when you observe it, when you're able to observe it, they can only pick one of the states.
There's a collapse problem.
Yeah, which you can be only Almighty or Almighty. You cannot be both, right? Because you're doing nothing. You are able to do, and you are able to do it, then you don't do it. It's a completely different that you are not able to do it and you don't do it. same consequence, but different
So you're going
stages.
to say first?
Yeah, sure. So I mean, this is a variation of, other people here might have heard of, for example, the paradox of the stone. Can God create a stone that's so heavy that he can't lift it? And if he can do that, then there's something he can't do. Lift the stone that he creates that's so heavy he can't lift it. And if he can't do it, then there's still something that God can't do. So one thing that shows is you have to be very careful by what you mean by being able to do anything. Philosophers usually take the route of saying, well, it's anything that's logically possible. Logically impossible things are not, in a sense, things that God fails to do, but non-possibilities. So it's not possible for God to create a contingent, finite creation over which he couldn't exercise control if he chose to. But that doesn't show that he lacks almightiness. That's constituted of, definitional of, being almighty is essentially having the power to do anything that you want to do that's logically possible to do. So again, God can't create square circles, but that doesn't mean he's omnipotent. And most, J.L. Mackie, the Oxford atheist philosopher, for example, made that kind of example and said, this we could agree is no real sort of restriction upon omnipotence. So yeah, I would say if it's essential to God's nature to have almightiness, then no, he can't lack almightiness, cause himself to lack almightiness. But that just is what it means to be almighty, and that's not really problematical. I'm really not sure, not being a scientist myself, of the applicability of quantum mechanics to the issue. If you could apply it, it would mean that you could kind of go between the horns of that apparent dilemma, of course. But I don't think you have to go between the horns of the dilemma. I think you just say, well, it's not a real dilemma, because what we mean by almightiness, omnipotence, it includes only doing things that are possible, and if God is by nature omnipotent, almighty, then that means it's not possible for him to not be himself, because that's just part of his essence. So.
Can I add something to this? So maybe that's why he's not showing himself, because then he would collapse into one stage or the other. He would observe it. So that's the explanation for the idiots. Another way of seeing it is that you take perfect being theism, as it's often called, and you say, well, God is something perfect. And being perfect involves not being inconsistent. So like, he couldn't create, so my favorite example is, could God roll a joint so big that he can't smoke it himself? And the answer is no, because that would make him an inconsistent being, and that's not the perfect being. So so it's a great making kind of argument that some people would give, a lot of what you just said, that perfect omnipotence, the all-powerful, all-good, all-knowing, has to be considered in combination, not individually. So it doesn't have each one to the maximum degree, that's a combination.
Yeah.
So that's one way of looking at it, that would resolve those kinds of dilemmas.
So traditionally, Christian tradition has said, even though we believe God is omnipotent, we don't believe God has the ability to do evil things, because God is all good. And being all good is as much part of God's consistent nature as being omnipotent. Omnipotence means being able to do anything that's logically possible that we want to do, but because God's all good, he never wants to do anything evil. So again, there's no limitation upon him. It's rather, it is constitutive of what it is to be like God, is to be that kind of being who is both all good and
But
exactly.
there's also this alternative from Descartes and forward that Brian Leftow has defended recently, which is saying that there's this notion of God, and you can say it's actually in God to have created this stone they can't lift, but he just chooses not to. And the phrase "it's in God to do what we find is impossible" is not like it's not a notion of illicit possibility. It's sort of like it's in God to do whatever we can imagine, actually, and more. But he just doesn't do it. He sells space and possibilities the way it is for a reason. And it's just in God to create a different possible space and possibilities, but he just did. But it's still in him to do it. And my criticism of this has been that, like, you can say it's in him to do it and say it doesn't mean it's possible, but I mean, it's just making calling me strong doesn't make me strong, right? It's just calling itself. So that's the process of that. But it's a tradition that just flat-footed says, no, God could smoke that joint. And he could make it. And he couldn't make it. That's it. What's the problem? But, okay.
Do you have more questions? Yeah.
Yes, so about this probability argument, there are many possible explanations for why the concepts are where they are. Maybe if we get a deeper understanding of this, we'll see that there's only one way differently. Or there are a plethora of different proposals for how we could have several lifestyles, for how we could have continuous expansion of multiverses, or how we could have contracting and expanding big bangs, and many of these many kinds of explanations that we can imagine for why we could generate many possible universes, and therefore, since we exist to observe it, we have to be in a universe that we can observe. So just generating many universes solves the problem, because we have to have a universe with these kind of constants to observe. So the point is that we need some kind of explanation for why we live in this universe with these constants that we do, and one of these statistical reasons seem very much more probable from like an operator point of view, because we're only assuming one thing. We're only assuming, hey, there's some kind of process that generates different kinds of combinations of constants. One thing, very easy to explain, and operator is about how difficult it is to explain a concept. It's not about how many universes it contains, or how many particles, or how many objects. It's about how difficult, how many propositions you suppose. So presupposing just a very small number of propositions is much easier than presupposing this entirely very complex idea of an intelligent creator, where we have to specify every single kind of aspect of how he creates exactly this world. So that's a huge number of propositions. When we just, it seems easy because we say God, but actually the concept behind God is hiding this massive amount of propositions, which makes this explanation much more complicated than an easy just generation of constants. So I'm wondering why you see God as a likely explanation of this, why that in any way appreciably increases the probability.
So can I answer that first?
Yeah.
So I'm sympathetic with a lot of what you said. I mean, so here's a couple of things that you might think. So here's a couple of the hypothetical explanations for the fact. So we see these constants. We see this like improbable thing right here, and we want to explain it. Everyone agrees that there's something to be explained here. Why is it like this? And then it might say, well, one explanation is just it should happen. It's chance. Another is there's an intention behind it. Another is the multiverse. All the possible combinations actually exist, and this is just one of them. So they all exist. There are probably one, nothing to explain. And another is giving some kind of the physicist's wet dream. It's the theory of everything that necessitates this. It just wouldn't be a mystery anymore after we have the theory of everything, which just fall out like, logical truth. So these are the four main contenders. There are some crazy other ones, but these are the four main contenders. Now, you had a problem with this one was that it was too specific and complicated, while this one is sort of like simpler. And I agree with you, there's a big difference when people use Occam's razor. They often misuse it by cutting down the number of things. But what they should do is cut down the number of kinds of things. They should cut down, having a million universes is no different from having one, really. It's the same kind of thing. So having one electron is not something we should go for, because that's a bad use of the Occam's razor. Even if we can explain everything by the universal electron, it's actually a theory that there's only one electron. So I agree with you on all that. And you said, but here's my thing, and I think this goes with what I said earlier, that I want to start with the minimal notion of God. I want to start with the notion of God that has nothing specific. It's basically just an intuition, not an intuition, it's basically just an intention with some power and knowledge to realize it. It's sort of like we have. We already know what that is, in a way. And I'm saying that an explanation in terms of an intention is somewhat more plausible than chance. And then the question is the multiverse is the main contender as an alternative explanation. And I think in this case, my problem with this is not that there are many universes as postulated. My problem is just that it isn't more empirically verified than this. It's a theoretical postulate. And this is a theoretical postulate. So it all comes down to which one's, more plausible kind of explanation of what's happening. Because there's nothing more in this than here, and there's nothing more in this than here. But you're saying there's more in here because there's intention and knowledge. But I mean, it's not, we already have intentions and knowledge. It's like saying, oh, there's, because you have it. You have intentions and knowledge, right?
Yes, but I mean, when you're adding knowledge is a big concept. We're talking about I'm guessing, like, knowledge about what kind of conditions will create life, and knowledge about what kind of conditions, and maybe even, if you want to
But we already have that kind of knowledge.
Yeah, but it's easily explainable by evolution in humans. Having this knowledge out of nowhere as a first cause, that's much more complicated than saying that there are several universes. That's a very small proposition. Saying that there is a cause which has knowledge about all these kinds of things, that's way more propositions.
So I agree that when you postulate the psychology, you're making something. Well, here's the question: is it more complicated to postulate the psychology behind it than postulating the physical theory that needs to realize the multiverse? So which one's more complicated? And you might argue that the psychology is more complicated because it's, has psychological features that's not here. But we already have psychological features in here. That's why I'm not convinced. And there's another feature that you also have to remember that, I don't know why I'm defending this one, but there's another feature also, which is that in this case, the multiverse, a couple of questions comes up. One is, well, how come the multiverse appeared? Right? So when's the multiverse? And then the question is, well, why is there life in the multiverse? Because the people who go for this argument, they think that life is something special that needs an explanation. And postulating a lot of universes that don't have life isn't explaining why there's life on this one planet that we are on, or this universe. So there are subtleties here that this is not explaining, like normativity for Peter. Normativity is going to be a feature. Other things, consciousness is a feature. Other things, goodness in general is a feature. And life needs to be explained. And a multiverse alone doesn't explain life, which is what you need. And then you might appeal to the observation position that we're here, we couldn't observe it unless we were here, so there's got to be life in order to observe it. But imagine this, I think that's a bad argument. Because imagine this, I'm being executed. I'm standing like this, 12 people are aiming at me to shoot me. And I'm blindfolded, I'm about to be executed. So I can't see anything, right? They all shoot, and it's over, and I open my eyes, and I'm still alive. Now, I wouldn't be here to observe this unless I was alive. But that doesn't make it less surprising. It's not like, oh, I'm here, so I should be surprised at the fact that they all missed. Because I'm here. Well, I should still be surprised that they all missed, because I'm here. I should think that someone didn't want to kill me or something. That's the intuition that's driving this kind of argument. And possibly the multiverse doesn't explain it. But I'm not going to defend it. Peter, you should defend yourself. I said it's feasible. I'm not totally convinced. I think it's a good argument. But I think you will probably have this.
Yeah, well, I think I probably agree with what you have said. I would pick up on that last point. The point here is that the fact that an event is a precondition of that event being observed doesn't explain the occurrence of that event. So the atheist philosopher Peter Cave puts it this way. He says, conscious beings exist. So of course, the universe is such a place that conscious beings can exist in it. But it may still be surprising that the universe is such a place when it could have been otherwise, and particularly when there were so many ways of it being otherwise, that it being this way such that conscious beings can exist in it seems highly unlikely. So that's the sort of the bold statement of the fact that was being brought up out there with the executionist analogy. Robin Collins is a philosopher that you should go to on the fine-tuning argument. He's got a website you can go to and find various papers for free on. He's an expert on this subject, and he picks up another point that Einar made. He observes that even if a physically plausible many-universe generator, on these sort of scientific theories of many universes, you have to have some physical mechanism that produces lots of different universes. Say different universes, rather than just photocopying the same sterile, lifeless universe infinite number of times, say. And any physical mechanism that produces different universes, such that at least one of those different universes would be hospitable to life, any such mechanism itself has to be, in a sense, fine-tuned so that it can have that result. So appealing to any sort of scientific many-universe theory, apart from the fact that there is no independent evidence for them, so it's like appealing to the monkeys to explain the complete works of Shakespeare in the absence of independent evidence. It's the inflationary fallacy. But it's also to just kick the problem up a stage from the one universe that we do know exists to, well, what accounts for the fine-tuning of the physical mechanism that produces all of these hypothetical different universes.
So can I just briefly add, because I can tell that you're not convinced. So let me just briefly add something. Look at this as the multiverse hypothesis. These are all the universes that could have been, and the concept could have been tweaked so that all these were realized. Multiverse says that they all exist. And the God hypothesis says that just this one exists, right? The colored one. And now the colorless here is life. It's like it's the living creatures like we are, rational, thinking, searching creatures. And only one of them, there's actually a couple of them, there's actually some, but very minority of the possible ones are compatible with them. Now, the God theory says that, well, you need an intention to explain why this is the only one that's realized. And the multiverse says no, because in quantum mechanical theories, they're all going to be realized. So they're all there, so there's nothing to be explained. But the question that the point that we're trying to make is that in this case, there's still only one that's lighting up. There's still only one that has life. Because that's what the physicists tell us, that all these others are incompatible with life. So they realize that, but there's not life in any of these others. That's only in this one. So now you just look at a bigger sample, and I'm still puzzled. Why is there life in this sample? And the point is, well, because all the possible stuff is actually the case, so it's life. But that's ignoring the fact that life is something that needs to be explained. And that's what I think you're denying. I think you're just saying life doesn't really need an explanation beyond any other physical stuff. Then you could just as well go with this. There's no reason for you to pick this over this. So really, multiverse has nothing to do with this. This is